Chapter 6, Lesson 1, Advanced Algebra. We're going to look at polynomial functions. And the first lesson we'll talk about what a polynomial is, its definition, what it looks like, and how to classify it. And then in the lessons after that, we'll start doing some arithmetic with those polynomial functions, and we'll begin to look at what their graphs look like. You remember we've been looking at functions all year long, and we want to be able to recognize an equation as what kind of function it is, and then also have a mental picture of what that graph of that function looks like. We've looked at linear functions, and we know the graph looks like a line. We've looked at absolute value functions. Those graphs look like a V. We have looked at quadratic functions. Those graphs look like U's. And so polynomials, what do those graphs look like, and how do we identify the graph when we see the equation? So let's begin our discussion of polynomials by figuring out what a polynomial is. Now, this paragraph describes what a monomial is, and it says a monomial is, and then it tells us what it is. It's either a real number, so a monomial can be just a real number, like the number 23, or it could be just a variable, like the letter x, or it could be a product of a real number with a variable, so 23x, that means 23 times x, so this is a product of a number and a variable. Or you could use any variable with a whole number exponent. So x to the fifth would be a monomial. 23x to the fifth is a monomial. So a monomial really is any kind of term that we've worked with in the past. These are nothing new. We've been using these for quite some time now. So really we're just putting a fancy name to it, the name monomial. Mono, coming from the word, it means one. So this is a one-term nomial, so to speak. So that's what a monomial is. Now, the paragraph also talks about what a polynomial is. A polynomial, poly meaning many, so many nomials. So this polynomial would be, as it says here, just one monomial by itself, so it could also be called a polynomial, or the sum of some monomials. So when you start adding these different terms together, you have now what we call a polynomial, because you have many monomials put together. Poly meaning many, mono meaning one. So a monomial is anything that we've been working with in the past. We also call these terms, and when we put them together, adding them together or subtracting them, which is adding the opposite, we then have what we call a polynomial, just meaning many monomials put together. Okay, so that's what makes a monomial, and that's what makes a polynomial. Now, when we're looking at these polynomial, it says here that the exponent of the variable in a term determines the degree of that term. Okay, so the degree of any monomial is determined by the exponent of the variable. So we're looking at the variable, we're looking at the exponent. Whatever that exponent is, that's called the degree of that monomial. Okay, so let me pull up just an extra chart here, and so I can give you some examples. So for instance, if I have 23x squared, what is the exponent of the variable? It's a 2, so this would be considered a second degree polynomial. Okay, if I have 47x to the fifth, well, what would this be? This would be a fifth degree monomial or polynomial. Again, it's determined by the variable of the exponent. So that's how we determine the degree of each term. But what if we have a number of these terms added together, meaning we have a sum or we have a polynomial? What do we do with that? Well, the first thing that we'll want to do is to put it in what we call standard form. And the standard form of a polynomial simply means that you take all of the terms with variables in them and you put them in descending order according to the degree of each term. In other words, if you have, well, let me go back here and do this. So if I have 23, I have an x cubed, that's one monomial, and let's say I add it to an x squared monomial, and let's say I have an x monomial, and then I have an x to the 0 monomial. This is a polynomial because it's a sum of many monomials, and this is standard form because you'll notice that the exponents decrease in order from left to right. So these decrease in order. 3, 2, this is an exponent of 1, and then this is actually could be written as x to the 0 because anything to the 0 power is just 1. So when we have a polynomial in standard form, or when we have the exponents going in decreasing order, we're in standard form. Now just a note here, before moving forward, before you make any calculation or before you make any determination of what kind of degree or polynomial it is, you always want to put the polynomial in standard form first. That will always be the first step every time, because everything that we do mathematically is predicated on the fact that the polynomial is in standard form to begin with. So you'll always want to be sure that before you start doing any kind of answering of a question, whether it be calculating something or classifying a polynomial, you'll always want to make sure that it's in standard form first. Very important point. Okay, so standard form, the degrees go, or the degree of each term are in descending order. All right, now there's one very special note here, is that you'll never have two terms with the same degree, because those are like terms, and so you'll want to simplify that into one term. So you'll never have a 3x squared plus an x squared. Well, those two can be combined because they're like terms. So standard form, you're only going to have one term of each degree in descending order because all of the like terms have been added together or simplified. Okay, so monomial, polynomial, and degree in standard form, that's what we've talked about so far. So now that we know what a polynomial is and we know how to put it in standard form, how do we classify it? And there are two ways that we can classify it. We can either classify it by the number of terms that it contains, or we can classify it by the degree. So when we're classifying by the number of terms, we're simply looking at how many terms it has, and the name is based upon how many terms. Now understand this, that these are all polynomials. Polynomial is a general term. These names that we're going to give based upon the number of terms that it has is a more specific name. So they can either have up to 3 terms where we'll have special names. Anything over that, we'll just continue to call them polynomial. So a one-term polynomial is called a monomial, mono meaning one, so a one-term polynomial is a monomial. Binomial, bi means 2, so a binomial would be a polynomial of 2 terms. Trinomial, tri meaning 3, this would be a polynomial of 3 terms. And again, anything over 3, we're just going to name it or call it a polynomial. So again, all of these are polynomials. These are just specific terms that are applied to those types of polynomials that have these specific number of terms. Now the second way that we can classify a polynomial is by the degree. We talked about how to determine the degree of each monomial. How do you determine the degree of a bunch of monomials that are adding together? And that is determined by the largest degree of any term in the polynomial. So once we have that in standard form, the highest degree monomial will be first. And because that's the highest degree monomial of all of them, that is going to determine the name of the polynomial as well. So the polynomial takes on the name or the degree, the classification by degree of that first term. So that's why it's important to put it in standard form first and then classify it based upon its degree. So let's take a look at the names that we're going to use when we're classifying by degree. If we have a first degree polynomial, it's going to look like this, and again the exponent is a 1, and we've looked at these before. This is called a linear term, so this would be a linear polynomial. If we have a second degree polynomial, again we've looked at those before and we've worked with those, this would be a quadratic because that's the highest term. A third degree polynomial would look like this, q being the exponent, and this would be called a cubic when something to the third power is cube. A fourth degree polynomial, if it's a fourth degree, this is called a quartic, like a quartet, quartic. And then if we have a fifth degree polynomial, we're going to use the word quintic, quintic meaning 5. All right, so linear for a first degree, quadratic for a second degree, cubic for a third degree, quartic for a fourth degree, and then quintic for a fifth degree when we're classifying these polynomials. Okay, so now that we know how to classify it by its numbers of terms and by its degree, let's go ahead and do an example. So in this example, we need to write the polynomial in standard form first, and then classify it by the degree and then by the number of terms. So if we look at this first example, we notice we have a term that's a first degree and a term that's a fourth degree. Standard form says that the highest degree has to go first, so we'll put the highest degree first and then put them in descending order. So this would be standard form. Now we can classify it by its degree. It's a fourth degree, so that's going to be a quartic. And then by the number of terms, there are two terms, so that's going to be a binomial. So this would be a fourth degree or a quartic binomial when we classify it by degree and number. Okay, let's take a look at another example. In this example, again, we need to put it in standard form first. So here's a second degree, a first degree, a third degree, and another first degree. Now, standard form requires that this largest degree monomial be first, and it also requires that I only have one of each type. In other words, I need to add any like terms. So this linear term here and this linear term here can be added together. So I'll need to do that to simplify it. So once I've done that, I have 3x cubed first, and then I have the x squared term, and then the two linear terms added together end up being this. So this would be the standard form. Now I can classify it by its degree. So I take the first degree of the degree of the first term, which is a third degree or a cubic, and that will be the degree of the entire polynomial. So this would be a cubic. And then classified by number of terms, there are three terms, so that's a trinomial. So this would be a cubic trinomial, would be its classification. All right, so hopefully that's pretty simple. Hopefully you have that, and that kind of ends our discussion. We'll wrap up our discussion about a polynomial. Remember the terms, remember the classifications, and the vocabulary, and then we'll look at how we can work with these algebraically moving forward.